Every night, now that's not culture. I reminisce with bliss of when I first approached you, then wake up to be greeted by an argument again. Maybe we better off friends, so insecure. If I take too long at the store.
Welcome once again to another episode of Another Mediocre Podcast. This is our 7th episode. As always, I'm your host, Lou Capetta. Also, as always, you are listening to the sounds of New Jersey hip-hop recording artist and producer extraordinaire in Richmond. This is his song, Front Door. And this week, my guest is Melissa Jacobs. She is a former ESPN radio and television producer, one of the key contributors to the creation of ESPNW, and currently runs her own website talking all about football, from fantasy to the games, everything, anything you can think of. It's all football, and it's from a woman's perspective called thefootballgirl.com. She also has a podcast called the Football Girl Podcast. It's relatively new and really accentuates women in sports. This week we talk about her career and everything from women in sports to what it was like to work with the late, great Dick Schaap. So if you're into sports and especially football, or you are interested in women working in sports, or you are a woman who wants to work in sports, this is a great episode for you to listen to. So without further ado, here's this week's episode. And as always, thank you for listening. Thank you for supporting. You can find this podcast on iTunes, Google Play, Spreaker.com, SoundCloud, YouTube, pretty much anywhere else you could think of to get podcasts. So enjoy. Welcome once again to another episode of Another Mediocre Podcast, where the podcast is mediocre, the host is definitely mediocre, but the guests are not, and today is no exception. My guest today is one of the most respected names in any football circles. She began her career as the youngest executive producer in the history of KNBR radio in San Francisco. She's a former producer for ESPN who produced shows for the likes of Dan Le Batard and the late, great Dick Schaap. She's a football writer for SI and is a founder and managing editor of thefootballgirl.com, a site that has been recognized multiple times by Forbes as one of the top 100 websites for women, and I'll go further to say it's currently my number one site for all things related football, including fantasy. She is Melissa Jacobs. Thank you very, very much.
Wow, thank you, Lou. That was quite the intro.
Thank you. I mean, it's all true. So I should really thank you because you made my job very easy there. Yeah, and actually, your fantasy football advice is another thing. And I forgot to mention in the intro, you are also the host of the Football Girl Podcast, which is a relatively new podcast, but very, very, very good. If you get the chance to listen to it, please listen to it. So, I guess I should really start by asking you, like, football has always been your passion. How early did you realize that you wanted to be involved in sports and specifically football?
Yeah, so I grew up in the Bay Area in San Francisco, and kind of at the tail end of I was a child, like basically the tail end of the 49ers glory years. So I was, automatically a 49ers fan because you had to be by osmosis. But I was actually a lot more of a baseball fan growing up. I loved the San Francisco Giants so much. I mean, I would listen to every game on the radio where I would go. Like any money that I would earn, I would use on tickets. I loved it. But football was always number two. And I think, I think as I got older and I wanted to use more brain cells, there's just a lot more, chess going on in football. There's always something to learn. I mean, I could spend 6 months straight studying football, studying film, and I still wouldn't know everything. And there'd be, new rules. So I just got really intrigued by that. And then my career path, I mean, we don't need to go through it again, but at some point I started, covering the 49ers and Raiders as I had just started my career. And then when I went to ESPN, the, stars kind of aligned, and I worked on SportsCenter, but also on NFL Live. So I just dealt with a lot of NFL people too. And I loved, from the PR people to the players to the agents. And, I just grew very fond of the people, and I love the sport. So it all kind of, and hey, it's the number one sport in our country too. So I wanted to kind of catch that wave as well.
And I'm a huge baseball fan. I mean, I'm sure you could tell by my accent. I grew up I'm the Jersey boy. I grew up in the New York City metro area. No, actually, not Yankees. I am the only Mets fan in a family full of Yankee fans.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So, yep.
Huh?
Yeah. I mean, I was a kid in the 80s, and I loved those 86 Mets and those, I didn't know that I was in for a lifetime of hurt, but
my parents are actually from Queens, and I remember my first baseball game. I was like a baby or something, and it was that year, and I remember like hearing Mookie Wilson and just saying Mookie, and I remember my mom used to dress me in some shirt that said "Let's get Metsmerized."
Yes, that was. Have you ever seen that music? There's actually a music video called "Get Metsmerized" that the Mets tried to do, like kind of like the '85 Bears. It might not be a video. It's definitely a song though, but it's awful. It's like one of the worst things that you'll ever hear. But
send it to her.
So your parents are Mets fans?
My mother is. My father is a Yankees fan.
Well,
so
nice. But. Yeah, being a Mets fan is tough, but obviously in my area where I grew up, baseball was always first. But I'm also a Giants fan, and I grew up watching the Giants and stuff like that. Thank God, because there was no way that I could have dealt with being a Mets and Jets fan. That's just too much self-hatred there. That's awful.
Being a Giants fan isn't so great right now, but I'm sure.
No, actually, it's funny because this is like I have been less into football this year, obviously because of the Giants, than any other year. It's depressing. What do you think they're going to do with the second pick? I mean, this is kind of off topic, but you're the expert. I would like to know, what do you think that they're going to do with the second pick? I
mean, I want to see who's hired first. I think that will help determine the direction they're going.
Mm-hmm.
Quarterback.
Okay, that makes sense. That's what I would think. I mean, I feel like we say that about a lot of teams, and then they wind up getting, an offensive lineman or something. Right.
But I think it's pretty clear a quarterback, who that's going to be, is still to be determined. I think there's, not a super duper obvious one. So I think the combine and the pro days and all that stuff are going to go a long way in deciding where the dominoes fall.
Now, all right, whatever. I don't know what's going to happen with them. I'm an Eli guy. I love Eli, so we'll see. But I have a buddy of mine, and he's a huge Giants fan, and all he does is talk about the Giants all day, and I'm getting sick of it. So, yeah. So he's into everything. Like Bill Belichick's gonna come, and Nick Saban's gonna be his coordinator. Like he's just delusional.
Yeah, but, don't bet on that.
Yeah, no, thank you. I'm going to play this for him. You are the expert, and you said it. I told him too. He just told me I was a hater. So
just make bets with him and profit off of him. I heard Belichick's coming, but I'm just going to take a wild chance, and I'll bet you 50 that he's not.
He knew that I had you coming on the podcast. I'm going to tell him that you told me Belichick's coming, and I'm going to make that bet with him and win some money.
You're going to split the profits with me.
Got it. Deal.
Okay.
I'll have to ask for a big number then from him. He'll be all into it. All right. So, do you still write for Sports Illustrated?
No. So I was I guess that's the part you didn't mention in the intro. So I had founded the Football Girl in actually 2009, and I did that to sort of parallel the NFL's efforts to market to women. They were doing really great with selling apparel, but not so much in terms of editorial content. So I wanted to create just a place that wasn't condescending, that wasn't pink, where there was actually smart football analysis that would make women feel comfortable, but, also men would want to check out. So it did well and it grew. And 2 years ago, I guess it was, what are we in, 2018, 2015. Is that right? Yes. 2015, I just out of the blue, I got a LinkedIn message from SI that they were interested in me for an NFL editor position, which was incredibly flattering. And, it was very hard because I was at a place with the Football Girl at the time where I felt like we were kind of ready to really be big, but I didn't want to have any regrets. So I wound up taking that job, and I was the NFL editor at SI.com for 2 years. And then my family moved to California. We were in New York, and 6 months ago, my husband got a good job and whatever. So basically I left in March of last year. So, okay. Yeah. So, and then I had wanted to, I really wanted to come back to the site anyhow, to be honest. It wasn't I'm not with SI anymore. It was, it was great at SI. It was great for my profile and experience and all of that. I met some great people and got to edit some of the best writers in the business. But I was really kind of missing that female empowerment angle that I had sort of, I guess, kind of made my name on. So it's been really great being back.
So you're doing the footballgirl.com is that's what you're fully focused on at the moment?
Yeah. And this is the first year. I mean, even before I've been very lucky, even after I launched it, ESPNW launched and they called me and said, can you be one of our contributors? And I've just had a bevy of freelance opportunities that have kind of come my way. And this year, I actually, I don't want to sound snobby, but I've kind of turned down a couple of things.
Yeah, no, absolutely. That's good.
Getting this right. And and it's interesting too. Digital media has changed so much, even in the 3 years. So it's really kind of figuring out what the best way to people consume content and how that's going to be monetized. So I spent a lot of this season kind of just testing things and figuring them out. And obviously, as you know, launching a podcast. And so, yeah, it's in a good place.
One of the things I like what you were saying about your site, it's the footballgirl.com, but you said I think you used the term pink or whatever, but there's no pink. Yeah, it's about football. It's just anybody can read it. I read a lot of the stuff, especially the fantasy stuff. I'm big into the fantasy sports, but there's a lot of just really, really great content there. Do you make a conscious effort to make it accessible to everybody, or because it doesn't seem that you're just focused on the female fan. You are a woman who loves football, and you just make a site. You have a site about football for football fans. Is that accurate, or you?
Yeah, that's accurate. I mean, I think if I were a really, really smart businesswoman, I would probably everything would be female. I would only have female editors and writers, and I wouldn't be pink per se, but I would be every single thing that related to a female is what we would share. And I'd probably minimize some of the other stuff, but from a, content mentality, I veered that way a little bit, but yeah, I mean, I know football. I know female writers who know football, and they have, we had this great piece a couple weeks ago with Kyle Williams, the defensive tackle of the Bills, from a female freelance writer. And that's a piece that obviously a man could do. Kyle Williams, his last hurrah, he'd been the longest tenured Bill. But I'm going to have stuff like that on my site. It's cool. Awesome if it can be written by a woman. And, there is an emphasis, my podcast, other than our last episode where I talked to Ryan Shazier's dad, every guest has been female. And I want to, I've made a concerted effort. I want, people to hear the story of Beth Mowins, the first woman to do play-by-play for a nationally televised game, and Amy Trask.
Amazing episode.
Next week I'm having Laura Oakman on, the longtime Southern. I think it's important. I think women like that, but I also think, you said you listen to the podcast, and obviously, men should know these stories too. So I definitely don't do the thing where I'm like, this is for women only. This is a girl zone. I don't play in like women's only fantasy leagues and stuff like that. But I hope that I'm sort of like tangentially empowering women and making them feel comfortable at the same time.
Oh, I think that's what impresses me most about the site. I mean, if you don't mind me saying, is that it's just it seems empowering the women, but it's not like, this is not like a women's football site. Like, this is a football site. It just, it's run by a woman, and we emphasize, we want women included, but it is a legit football site that is welcoming to everybody. And I think you've done if you did that on purpose or not, you've done a really, really great job at that. And I encourage everybody to check it out, because it really is. It's a terrific site, even down to like the artwork and stuff. It's great.
Thank you very much. Yeah, I've just tried, especially coming from SI's. I shouldn't say it spooked me a little bit, but like my emphasis was on quality beforehand, and now even more so. Like, I want quality writers. I want my work to be quality. I mean, when I have typos, which I do a lot, especially because I don't have like a deep editing team, I get very upset at myself. And, I want to just present a product that people can kind of rely on. And I've tried to really emphasize that this year, and sort of de-emphasize the idea that like it's going to be heavy volume. That there's no possible way that we can ever compete, say, with like Pro Football Talk or ESPN or SI or anyone that's just, a high volume outfit. So I've tried to kind of make everything like specialized. And, I do a column on Mondays, Melissa's Monday Musings. We have a newsletter that has grown a lot, and I have the podcast. So like those three things are static and set. And then we obviously pop in other things like all the time as well. Now,
I'm gonna preface this. I know I mentioned this to you before we were recording, but so I'm I really, really wanted to talk to women in sports. It fascinates me. I have two grown daughters. They both played. One currently plays college basketball. My older one played. She's not playing now, but she coaches youth basketball. They're very, very involved in sports. Actually, my oldest daughter was at the Knick game last night. So they're very, very involved in sports, and they want to continue being involved in sports. So this was important to me. Are you conscious of that? Like there are young women out there who may look at you as a role model. I mean, even maybe you don't think of that in a sense because you're a writer and you're kind of behind the scenes, but they see that. Like a woman like you in sports, and it makes them want to follow in your footsteps, or it offers them an inspiration. Are you conscious of that? Do you think about that at all? Is that something that you even thought of when you began doing this, especially creating your own website and making it so successful?
No, that's a really good question. I think to an extent, yes. I think of myself personally as like I'm personally going to inspire people, but I did think my background and my credibility in what would become the site or be like the backbone of the site would hopefully make it feel legitimate, so women could feel like, this place is for me because it's smart enough for me, and it's not condescending in any way. And then, just in terms of my career and industry, I had a lot of mentors on my path, and, I can feel the shift now where I have, people like young writers asking me for advice, or, even if they pitch something and it's like not exactly there, and I give them some tips back, and then they, you can kind of see the communication and like the like hopefully appreciation, assuming it's sincere, of, advice that I'm giving. So, I'm very aware at this point. Like I said, I'm talking to Laura Oakman next week, who has been a longtime sideline reporter, and she started an outfit called Galvanize, which basically is shepherding the next generation of young broadcasters. So she brings these out. I mean, it's awesome. She brings these girls out and they do kind of fake media sessions with, NFL head coaches, because she has those contacts. And I'm not going to do that per se, but it's gotten me thinking of what can I do to mentor, up and coming writers or just those that maybe aren't comfortable in an NFL locker room yet or at press conferences. And maybe there's some, writer version of that I can do.
Right. Now, I mentioned before one of my favorite episodes of your podcast. It's relatively new, so there aren't that many episodes, but was with Julie DeCaro. Now, obviously, there's been a ton of stuff with men being sexually inappropriate, whether it be with Harvey Weinstein in Hollywood or just in the workplace in general. And you guys were talking a lot of that. Some of that is starting to come out in the sports world. Now, do you think that type of atmosphere? First of all, I like, without obviously mentioning specifics and stuff, because I don't want to name names or anything like that, but just without how prevalent is that in your line of work? And with everything coming out, do you think that may discourage young women today from wanting to, or make it more difficult for young women today to want to get into the field of sports writing, or especially like you're so good at what you do with football, and that is really, if you think about the most, I guess the most ferocious masculine sport, if you think off the top of your head. Do you think all this is prevalent and will keep young women from wanting to get into your line of work?
Well, I hope not. I think part of the Me Too movement, and the woman who started the whole thing, she just had an editorial that said, why I started the spreadsheet. I think, what was it? Shitty Media Men was the spreadsheet, and she wanted.
Really, I did not see that.
That's what started. That's what started part of the movie. Her name is Maura. I don't know her last name off the top of my head, but the point is to create a place where women feel comfortable. That was why she did the spreadsheet, and then it started to get posted on Reddit, and now, you've seen a lot of men fall from it. But I think there's a concerted effort. I think maybe when I was starting my career, you would have, I know I've had a lot of situations, and I didn't really have anyone to talk to about them. I couldn't go to all my white male bosses and about the things that were said to me or things like that. You didn't feel comfortable going to HR because you didn't feel like there was, a net for you. If, you've always felt powerless. Obviously the pay, there's been a pay inequality between men and women, which still exists, certainly in media. But I think that because everything is so out there now, and I think there's, I think top executives and companies, or at least my hope is that they're going to be more cognizant of putting women in those offices and understanding the importance of diversity and the importance of keeping that pipeline going. I also just think that younger women, millennials and even younger, I just think that they're super empowered now. They are in the generation, we're in charge. We don't take shit. They're changing jobs every 2 years. Like it. So I'm hoping that all of those stars align to make a more, comfortable atmosphere and a safer atmosphere for women in sports.
It's funny because I actually thought about telling my daughters hey, just so you know, it doesn't matter how old you get, you have a problem at the work, your dad's going to call me and your dad's coming down there. But then I think about, like you said, how empowered they are. And I'm actually
they can take care of them.
Yeah, he's probably better off dealing with me than them. So they're fine. But it's crazy. I actually, my day job is in construction. I've been in construction my whole life, and it's a male-dominated industry. And it's just, it boggles my mind where it's just like, I'm a construction worker by trade, and I know I have enough sense to know how to act appropriately in my workplace, at least. You know what I mean? Like, it's just, I think it really boggled my mind just how prevalent this was. And there was a young woman I met through Twitter who works with hockey, some of the minor league hockey teams. She has a blog post. She wrote a blog post and detailed like everything that she's had to deal with from the age of 18 to, I think she's like 25 now. And I read it and it was powerful. It really was. It amazed me that this is 2017 or 2018 and that's still going on. And I mean, it's like Mad Men era type stuff. You know what I mean?
Yeah. And I think in sports, maybe you don't have this in construction as much, but in sports, like much like entertainment, I mean, I talked about this with Julie DeCaro, but there's a hero worship culture.
Yep.
I mean,
yes.
when you see, I mean, when you're around these athletes and the agents and you just see the money and like what the expectations are and the women around them and everything, it's just like, it's just a whole different stratosphere, right? And then you have these kind of like, in a lot of cases, these executives who are like these dorky dudes who never played sports and like, they've
right.
become empowered because now they've risen up their company ladder and they're around these athletes and they see how the athletes communicate with the females and whatnot. And they, I think some of that rubs off, like they want to be in that circle and then they start acting inappropriately and, we see what happens. So.
Awful. Now, one of the things I read in your in my intro, I really actually. So you worked with Dick Schaap.
Yes.
How was that? I mean
God.
I mean, honestly, if you're like, he's on the Mount Rushmore of sports writers.
Yeah.
How was that? You could just describe like what, if you don't mind, just. What your job was for him and just how it was working with him. I know his son Jeremy is a great. I love him on ESPN as well. But Dick Schaap, he was one of those special guys, right?
Yeah, absolutely. So I started my career in San Francisco, as you mentioned, at KNBR, very quickly. I mean, I was 23. ESPN Radio recruited me.
Okay.
So I moved from San Francisco to Bristol, Connecticut. And I got there and there wasn't really a show for me to produce. Like I had been the executive producer. Like I didn't, there just wasn't like we need a producer for this particular show. It was kind of like, we just need another producer. So I kind of just like rotated around things. And then finally, a few months in after I think said what the hell like 15 times. I want to show. Dick Schaap did a show on Saturday mornings, and it was not promoted very well because all the emphasis was on Mike and Mike, and at the time the Dan Patrick Show, which I understand.
Wow, yeah.
Standpoint. But I mean, Dick Schaap has this show and I become the producer. And, first of all, the guests are like Billy Crystal, like Ricky
right.
Jackson. Like anyone that we want to call, we could have called like an ex-president. It didn't matter. Like he knew every person literally in the world and all. I mean, Dick Schaap was voted for the Tonys and the Emmys and the, Pro Football Hall of Fame. I mean, he's just the most well-rounded, incredible man who was so well respected. And, I was in Connecticut. He was based in New York. That's where he did the show from. And I very quickly, like the second weekend, went in to meet him. And, he just like a traditional New Yorker, like he had his table at a certain Chinese restaurant, like every Saturday. And he was so warm immediately. He like gives you one of those hugs that's like, simpatico kind of hugs. And, he had no, he's like the most accomplished sports writer out there. Like he had no reason to honestly like give a shit about me other than the fact that I was his producer, which was not his primary job. This radio show was sports reporters at the time, but
I love that show. That was actually for years, my favorite show on TV, Sports Reporters.
Yeah, it was incredible. And he was such a great host. And he just peppered me with questions. Like I was any interview subject. Like he wanted to know everything everything about me. I mean, we talked about theater. He was such a huge theater buff, and it was like, I felt like we were friends in 10 minutes. And
That's
that
awesome.
was the power of, and then I would come into the city a lot and have meals with him. And I became really close with Jeremy, who wound up being a co-host on that show. And Dick was just like a collector of people. You get invited to a dinner with him and there'd be like, his trainer from the gym, like Academy Award winning documentarian, me, like, Joe Frazier, like he just would put, there wasn't a like
random collection of people that was.
Yeah, he would just put people together and it would always work because he was there. And I remember it was right after 9/11. I was producing the show then when he went to the hospital and for a routine hip surgery that went awry, and it was a very, very dark period. His funeral was one of like the most powerful events I've ever been to. I mean, Patti LuPone, who's a huge Broadway star, sung there. The Billy Crystal delivered the eulogy. I mean, he was so incredibly beloved, and I still think about him all the time.
Before you met him, when you were going into that job, were you nervous? Like, were you really like starstruck almost? Did you understand the the magnet? Thank you, good word. Of like,
Thanks.
Did you ever like sit there and pinch yourself and like, oh shit, like this Dick Schaap?
I mean, kind of. I definitely didn't walk in with any swagger, right? I wasn't like
right.
3-year-old producer, and I'm going to tell you what to do because you're Dick Schaap. I mean, it was definitely maybe for a second, but like that's the thing about Dick is it doesn't feel like that after you're with him for 10 seconds. It's like he wants to know all about you. There's no awkward pauses. He knows, he knows how to continue to ask questions. Like it's an art form for him. And he's just, a very warm, engaging person. So he puts you at ease. That's why he was able to dig so much from, all walks of life of interview. Cause he is so skilled at that.
He seemed very disarming.
Yeah, there's no announcer voice with Dick. Like he doesn't, he never got on and was like, I'm Dick Schaap and maybe he did for reads or whatever, but not in talking to people. Like it was all very genuine. Always. I mean, God, if he were alive when podcasting was going on, oh my gosh, I can't even imagine the conversations that he would have.
Oh yeah, I didn't even think about that. Wow, yeah. Wow. Yeah, he was always one of my favorites. I loved him. And Sports Reporters was my favorite show. It's probably my favorite show of all time. There's something about just stripping everything down and they were just sports reporters, the guys and girls in there that really they were just talking. It was terrific. I loved it. And when I did my bit of research on you, and I found out that you worked for Dick Schaap, I thought that was that really interested me more than anything else. That was not more than anything else, but it definitely interested me, and that's fascinating. So,
well, I'm glad you appreciate that because especially now in 2018, a lot of people would say, Dan Le Batard, who has a TV, who was also
he's
terrific
great too.
Way, but it's nice to hear your appreciation of Dick.
I love Dan Le Batard too. It's one of my favorite shows now when I get to listen to it. But he and I loved what he did with his when he sold his Hall of Fame ballot and they got booted out of Hall of Fame. That was terrific.
Much respect.
Yeah, and did you work on his radio show as well? Was that radio?
Yeah. A lot of people starting off at ESPN have very weird schedules. So my off days were Mondays and Tuesdays. I would do Dick's show on Saturday. Typically, I would then go into the city to have some form of social life because that would not happen in Bristol, Connecticut. And then I would come back at like very strange hours. Dan, at the time, his radio show was from 7 to 11. a.m. on Sundays. So it would be me being half awake, calling Dan, who was basically asleep, at 6:45, saying, roll out of bed. Somehow he'd do it, and then he would just speak brilliantly for 4 straight hours. Well, I was still kind of falling asleep, but we had a great time. He's so brilliant. So he would we'd have an array of interesting guests, and, a lot of them were ESPN, the magazine people, but we also, I remember, a player at the time would always, even though it wasn't allowed, we'd always get this one player, that would come on the show, 2 hours before his kickoff. And, there's just some fun, unique stuff. We could try stuff. We had fun with the music and guests, and I think we were both half coherent during the show, but it was really fun.
Do you miss any of the radio stuff now? Did that help lead you to doing your podcast, or?
Not really. I mean, I loved radio, but to be honest, when I got to ESPN, I was very enamored with the TV side. Mm-hmm. And, that was what people associated with ESPN, even more so than, that's when SportsCenter was really in its heyday, and there was more money to be made on the TV side. And luckily, one of the ESPN executives, just really liked my work, and he was very interested in shepherding women. And so he kind of encouraged me to pitch something. I had sort of made my name in the Bay Area on booking guests, getting a lot of exclusive interviews and things like that. And that kind of had caught the attention of ESPN. I did that somewhat at ESPN Radio, but that's what I wound up pitching as a talent producer job. And that's how I got over to SportsCenter is at the time on SportsCenter, it was always news breaks, we're going to talk to a team reporter. And I was like, no, let's talk to the newsmakers. Let's talk to the people in question, and let's make news, or let's have athletes on that can talk and we'll make news. So we did that, and it spiraled, and it became a department. And I was I was done with radio at that point. Although, I missed it. It's unlike TV, of course, it's more free flowing and, can be a lot more interesting, but the TV side is, a little more, I guess, splashy.
Right. Now, actually, so you were on SportsCenter for a while. What do you think of the SportsCenter at 6 with Michael and Jamel? You liked what they did with that?
Yeah, well, I don't watch it regularly, just because I'm working, and now I have children, which I didn't have back then, of course. But I love Jamel. I know she's people, people are polarized on her. I'm sure a lot of it's political, but I love
some guy in the White House doesn't seem to like her too much, but.
Whatever. I don't really care.
I agree. I love her. She is the best.
Then maybe we'll start listening. But she's just incredibly talented. She's she knows how to ask questions. She's funny. She's so smart. You don't find that kind of chemistry that she has with Michael most places. Right. You see hosts that are pitted together in radio and podcasting and television, and I don't know that I've seen anyone with that kind of chemistry. So, I don't watch it on a day-to-day basis. I'll watch, clips that people share on Twitter, and, I definitely admire their talent.
Well, one thing that I forgot when I, in my intro is you were one of the people responsible for helping to create ESPNW. Is that correct?
Yeah. I wouldn't say I was sitting. No, it wasn't part of my time in Bristol. So what happened is I was in Connecticut, and I loved my job, and I was good at my job, and I was sort of at that position where, was I going to go on the upper management track and be in Connecticut for the rest of my life? Or was I going to leave? And at the time, I was really into politics. I had volunteered for a certain presidential candidate whose name I will not say. But I was very, very interested in possibly transitioning over from sports to politics. So I was intrigued by DC. I'd spent a lot of time there, and I actually was on my way to interview for a job that would have been at a political consulting firm, a total departure from what I was doing.
Really?
Just because I wanted to get out of New York. Out of Connecticut. Mm-hmm. I was very, like into film. Even my boss, I had a really close relationship with my boss, and we would talk about it. And she's like, yeah, you should probably be in New York or somewhere like a little more cosmo. She kind of she got my vibe. Right. She didn't think I was an ESPN lifer. So it was funny. I had spent those 5 years, like basically partying in New York, dating in New York, having fun in New York. Mm-hmm. I was certain I wanted to live in New York. And then I got a job offer out of the blue to work at HBO. And I turned it down because I was scared of living in New York after everything. I mean, it was crazy. And this is all when I was sort of like, okay, I need to sort of transition my life a little bit. So yeah, I was on my way to I was driving to DC to go interview with a political consulting firm, and then a different department of ESPN called me and were like, Jim Rome has a daily show. We want you to be like the lead, talent producer on it, and we'll work on the ESPYs and all this other stuff. And I was kind of like, okay, that's like kind of, it wasn't that exciting for me, but then it was a very like good contract. And the key thing is that they said I could live where I wanted. So I was like, okay, cool. So, so I did that for a couple years. I lived in DC, quickly realized I didn't want to work in, politics. Mm-hmm. I would travel to LA all the time. That's where Rome was based, and do the ESPYs and like, Vegas NBA parties that ESPN would put on, stuff like that. That was, people would think was really cool, but it was like pretty frivolous and like didn't really use many brain cells. And then that department actually folded a couple years later. So that's when I started, the website. And which I had wanted, I had wanted to do something to market to women in football, and I couldn't really, I was actually going to write a book, and then I realized that probably wasn't the smartest idea. So it was right after I started the website. It was like, let me think, it was December of 2010. And I had started it in the end of 2009. So yeah, it was like summer of 2010, and Rob King, who like runs everything at ESPN now, just reached out to me and was like, we're starting this, ESPNW. He actually wanted to bring me on full time. And I didn't want to do that because I just started the site. So we kind of worked out something where I worked like 75 days a year. Nice. And it was a cool, it was in the infancy. So, I was at meetings where we're like, what is this going to be? Is it going to be, only covering women's sports? Is it going to be female perspectives on male sports? Right. And there was a lot of experimenting in those days. I mean, I actually was like sort of morphed into like the ESPNW fantasy person. I think now, in the years since, like they've gotten a lot smarter about just kind of, they kind of just keep it to women's sports. And then they have a few like Sarah Spain and McManus before the layoffs, like kind of developing those personalities. So they could talk about anything, but it would still kind of apply to ESPNW. But yeah. So yeah, that's a long-winded way to tell you how I got.
No, that's perfect. Actually, the political thing is interesting. I actually have a friend of mine that I grew up with. She, I still keep in touch with her. She actually helped my son out start getting into politics and stuff. And she was a part of Hillary Clinton's last campaign. She worked on Hillary Clinton's campaign that she lost. And she's actually very busy. She's working for a senator now. I forget which one. She works behind the scenes. But I'm trying to get her as a guest because she has some very, very interesting stories, and it's just it's amazing. Like I kind of have a little bit of an interest in politics, but it's just some of the stuff she tells me is it's just mind-boggling, and how just intricate everything is, and how many people are involved in just a decision on one thing. It's very it's fascinating, actually. So that's what made you. Did you decide very quickly that wasn't for you, or politics? Yes.
Yeah, I mean, I was a political science major in college. I always thought I was going to be lawyer. That's actually how I got into sports. I was actually going to be a sports agent first and then maybe run for office a few years down the road at a level. That was sort of my plan. I don't know how that all would have fit. But in my
voted for you.
18-year-old brain at the time, I thought it was going to be no sweat, right?
Right.
I always loved politics. I used all of my vacation days at ESPN to canvass at the time, to volunteer. And I thought I could be like a communications director for maybe a congressperson. But then I lived, once I was there and I kind of saw the vibe of it, and I wasn't scared off by the intensity per se, but oh, sorry, my son just walked in. Hi, Cyrus.
All right.
All right. He's wearing a Jimmy Garoppolo jersey, by the way.
Oh, nice.
He's gone now. But
my son's dressed as a Ninja Turtle right now, so it's all right.
It's okay. Cool. We should. I don't know how those go together, but Jimmy Garoppolo, the Ninja. But yeah, I don't know. I just didn't like the vibe. And I kind of, I just got very entrepreneurial as I was doing, I was doing this job for ESPN that I mentioned, like going to LA, and it wasn't that hard, to be honest. Like I would book a guest for Jim Rome's show, and it could be like the day before or the morning of, and then like that would be it. Sometimes I'd be out there, but sometimes I'd just be at home, and it's like, all right, what am I going to do? And it's like, it's like 11 a.m. Like, what do I do the rest of the day? I think I ran a lot in those days, but I would try to be segment ideas, but like, I had a lot of free time to think about what I wanted to do. And I wanted to like marry my experience and my knowledge of football. And, I at the time before football became like kind of soiled by all the issues that it has now, I was really excited, about, engaging more women, and just, I thought I could be in this place where I really brought in a lot more female fans, not only made them comfortable. And I'm still there, but I wish the NFL was slightly more appealing.
Right. Now, your podcast episode with Beth Mowins,
yes,
that seemed like you seemed very, very really into that. I mean, and it was awesome.
I was into it.
But you asked her a question that, as soon as I heard it, was a question that I wanted to ask you. So it's
okay.
So I don't know if you know what I'm talking about, but basically you asked her about the best way to go about her accomplishments. Like you said, do you write a book? Really accentuate the many paths that you've help be a trailblazer for, or do you just, this is your job, you go about your business every day, and you maybe don't get the recognition that you probably deserve for all of the doors you're opening for young women and stuff like that. You know what I'm talking about? I mean, that's basically
yeah. It was kind of a question that was rooted in how much self-promotion?
Yes.
Do you? Because we've seen, and I think I mentioned this to Beth, like Jen Welter, who did the training camp stint with the Cardinals, like she's great, right? And she made history in her own right. She's written a book, and she everywhere she goes, it's first female, and she touts herself as that, and she's terrific. Then you see like Sarah Thomas, the first female official, and she wouldn't do interviews for a while. And it just happened last year. I interviewed her at the Super Bowl last year. She was doing some stuff for Dan and Yogurt. So, and even Beth here, Secret, I interviewed Sam Ponder for this series, Secret, celebrated female first. Mm-hmm. So Beth got, attention through that. I don't think she swatted it away. But she never, she's not a self-promoter. She's not on Twitter like, watch me call the Bills-Dolphins game this Sunday. Right. She's kind of like does her job and lets other people promote her, I guess.
So I was, how do you feel is pertaining to like your career? How do you plan on going about that? Because you are, I mean, you're doing I mean, we've just talked a lot about you're a trailblazer in a lot of ways, and maybe you don't think of yourself that way, but you are, and you are offering a very good example for young women that want to be involved. Well, not just young women, but just women in general who want to be involved in sports. I mean, you've been involved with some of the biggest names in sports and sports journalism, and then you start your own website, and it's doing well. Your podcast is terrific. How do you go about that? How would you handle that, I should say?
I appreciate, the insinuation. I don't think of myself like that because, I'm not the first female GM or the first official. I don't feel like I'm actually shattering glass, that I've done that. I just feel like I've sort of toughed it out in this really difficult industry for women, and just feel like I just have thick skin, basically. I'm just like one of the, growing number of women who have thick skin, because that's what you have to do. So I don't know, like, how I promote it. Like, I like questions like you're asking. I like going on shows and having people kind of talk about the female angle. But I don't necessarily like to say, like, I have the best site for female fans or whatever. I don't even know if that's true.
I'll say it. I will say that. You do.
Thank you. I don't know that's true. But, I don't really feel like promoting it like that. I mean, the taglines for the site will, I think for my podcast, it's like, finally a podcast for women who love football. Like, I'll do sort of the marketing tagline type stuff, but as it applies to me specifically, I don't feel that. So I don't think there's like any specific, I will say I'm was the first, I'll say, like you said in the intro, I was the youngest executive producer at KMBR. I don't say I was the youngest female producer, the first female, executive producer. And I don't even know why I say the youngest. It's probably not that, it's radio. There's a lot of young people who have big jobs in radio, but right. I don't know. Maybe I should change that up now.
It sounds great. I mean,
all right. Well, if you approve, I'll keep it. Sure.
I'll just, if you need a hype man, I'm your guy.
Yeah.
That's it.
You're my new PR person.
So, I mean, before I let you go, and I want to thank you very much for taking the time to do this. It means a lot. Again, I'm a big fan. But I really, what's next for you? Is it the website, podcast? That's what you're focused on? You have anything big on the horizon or?
Oh. I can't possibly, without spilling too many details, I've spent a lot of this season, obviously producing content, cultivating some writers, but I've also really been studying how digital media is consumed in 2018 and with, including some of the sites that exist that are subscription models. And that's not what I'm going to, for the site as a whole, but, I'm looking at some different, ancillary businesses that kind of take the brand of the football girl that we've built and turn it into something that, let's just say would have a big educational element for both women and beginning fans and really any fan. So, you'll probably see a taste of that on the site coming up in the next couple of weeks as, we're sort of gonna test response, and then there might be something pretty big that follows.
Oh, awesome. Now, where can everybody listen to you? Obviously, they can check you out at thefootballgirl.com. And where is your podcast available? Is it everywhere podcasts are available? Or
I hope so. I think we are. I had a person write to me and say, I can't find you on Podbean, which sorry, I didn't even really know what that was. So now we're on.
That's the first I've ever heard of it. But
Okay. I mean, it's awesome. We love Podbean. If you listen to the podcast on Podbean, you're awesome. But I think we've done a good job of trying to be on every podcasting outfit. Obviously, iTunes is the biggest.
Right.
But
if you're listening on Podbean, you should just get iTunes. Go get yourself an iPhone. Nah, yeah. I'm kidding. That's me saying that. Great too.
If you're listening to this podcast, then you're going to listen to my podcast wherever you want to listen to it. It's fine. Right. But I think that's the best way to hear the podcast. And then in terms of, the site, The Football Girl, and we're on Football Girl on Facebook, and I'm The Football Girl on Twitter. And then we have a brand Twitter account that's like TFG_NFL. That people can follow. That's more just like we share highlights during games, and sometimes we do specialty, we'll live tweet certain events and things like that on there. But yeah, it should be relatively easy to find.
Awesome. So everybody, please check out that. Right now, it's basically just like my family members listening to this. So my family members who are listening to this, I'm just kidding, but I have a couple of friends too. But check out thefootballgirl.com and check out the Football Girl podcast. I think I started listening to it on SoundCloud, but iTunes, Google Play, wherever you listen to your Podbeam, if you listen to your podcast there, and you guys are gonna be you're gonna love it. I'm vouching for you. You're gonna love it. So,
all right. Well, thank you.
I thank you for taking this time, and I'll definitely be looking out for you again, and maybe come on the show again. Next time you open something big, come by. We'll talk some football.
Yeah, sounds good. Absolutely. Thanks for having me.
No problem. Thank you so much again, Melissa.
Okay.
All right.
Bye.
Take care. Thank you for checking out another episode of Another Mediocre Podcast. If you like what you hear, you can subscribe on iTunes or check us out on Spreaker.com. You can also check out accordingtolewblog.com. Thanks again for listening, and we'll see you next time.